Hello and welcome to our podcast on bookending in texts. This is another one of the literary devices that we like to talk about as we move through both reading and viewing texts. And so let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So what is bookending? This is probably not something you'll find in the literary encyclopedias that you may be searching through, but it is a name that we have chosen to use for a relatively simple and common concept that we see used in both written and visual texts. And the idea of bookending is the idea of using the same or a very similar scene or element at the beginning of and at the end of a text. So the shorthand is, if you've ever read a story that seems to begin right away with some action, like you're thrown into the action, you don't really know what's going on, and then the story backs up, and then you watch the story unfold, and then you see that same scene again, now that it's been better explained, that is bookending, where typically that original scene you watched is revisited at the end of the movie or the book. It is bookending all of the action. But the second time you see it, it makes a lot more sense because you've got a lot more explanation. So to layer that onto our hero's journey that we've been talking about all the time, here is that hero's journey plot map. There are the 12 steps that we continue to talk about. And here is the idea of adding a bookending moment. So perhaps what's going on is, from the bottom left, you see some scene where the character has accomplished something. You don't know why. You don't know what they've done to accomplish it. Or you see a character seemingly being pensive or thoughtful about something. You don't know why they're being thoughtful about something, but you see that as the opening scene of a book. Or you see a scene where a character has seemingly finished something, has accomplished something. You don't understand why. You don't understand what caused them to accomplish that. And then the entire text goes through the process of going back in time, hitting the ordinary world, the call to adventure, all the challenges that the character faced, the supreme ordeal, and then looping around and showing us that same scene again. We get to see the same scene we saw at the beginning of the book or the movie again later in that same text. But now we understand why the character had accomplished what they had accomplished, or why they were being thoughtful about something, or why they were congratulating somebody. And so when we have a scene that starts a text and seemingly ends a text, and those scenes are similar, if not exactly the same, that is bookending. Now, why does this matter? Why couldn't we just watch movies and let things unveil themselves in front of us? We certainly can. But as we actively read and actively view texts, this is another literary device or technique that some authors use to help reveal theme. And that is why we are reading books or short stories, or why we're watching films. We want to get to theme. We want to figure out, what is this text trying to teach us about life? And oftentimes, what that text is trying to teach is wrapped up in the bookending moment. At the beginning, we see a scene that doesn't make any sense to us, but we see that same scene later, and now we understand the background and the context of it. And whatever the character learned from that original moment to that end moment, that helps us as human beings learn. And that learning is what we call theme from literature or from films. So how do we find bookending? How do we know that a bookending scenario is even in play? Well, first off, agree to read or view actively. You're not just letting the text happen to you. You are engaging in the text. And then as you start a text, notice the elements at the start. And we'll talk about which elements really should be focused upon. But notice how that story is starting. Then watch the entire story. And if you see a same or very, very similar scene repeat itself at the end, then you have bookending in action. Now you may have to go back and rewatch the beginning, or go back and think about how it started and just put those two disparate scenes together. But if you can see how those scenes that are hundreds of pages apart or 2 hours apart on a movie, and notice how they're similar but also how they're different, then that can help reveal theme. What elements do we look for to see if bookending is in action? Well, look at that original opening to a text and then compare and contrast that to the same scene shown later. It could be action that is similar, or a location, like a character has started and ended the story in the same place. If it's a film, it could be colors Perhaps it's very dark and dismal at the beginning, but by the end, that same scene has come back, but it is light and airy and positive. Look at who's speaking. Oftentimes, it's the same character twice. At the beginning, the character is saying something that doesn't make any sense to us because we don't understand the story. But by the end, that book ending comes back and the same speaker is saying those lines again, and now we understand why they were so wise. We can also look at the exact lines that the character is saying before and later. If it's a musical piece, or if there's music playing behind the movie in terms of a score or soundtrack, we could look at the tempo. Perhaps the music is slow at the beginning, the same music plays again quickly at the end. Or we examine its musical key. And for people who aren't in band, orchestra, choir, whatever, a piece's key could be major or minor. And a minor key typically sounds sad. What if we hear the same music notes again, but they're very happy? That would be a major key. And so we can notice that change. And then the tone. Maybe it's a very pessimistic tone at the beginning. Maybe it's very optimistic at the end. Maybe it's hopeless at the beginning. Maybe it's hopeful at the end. But then the big note is there at the bottom of this. Not only do we have to notice the details from the beginning to the end, but we have to notice how does the book ending change by the end. It's not good enough to say, oh, they're both taking place on a beach. Interesting. It's the same speaker. They say the same exact lines. They say them with the same exact tempo. That's part of it. But there must be some amount of difference. So we have to figure out what has caused that difference, what the characters learned that made that book ending change, and therefore what can we learn from that change as well. And so as we work through practice texts, we will use this chart. And so you can see down the left-hand side, those were the elements that we just talked about: action, colors, dialogue, etc. And across the right, in terms of the rows, that's where you can be taking notes. The first occurrence of something, you don't know where this is going. Fine, just take notes on what you notice, what you observe, the literal level. It's on a beach, sunny day. DiCaprio's character is speaking. They say these words. Fine. Then, when you look at the second occurrence, which happens later in the hero's journey, later in the text, same thing. Just literally write down what you're seeing. Then the third column says similar specifics in the second that clearly link it to the first. Say, not every film uses bookending. And so the proposition is, if they are using bookending, that the beginning and the end of the text must clearly be linked. There must be something that is specific and similar between the two. What gave it away for you to start thinking, oh my goodness, they're using bookending? Did they use the same exact lines? If so, what were they? Was it the same exact setting? If so, what was it? And then the fourth column is where you're really getting to the meat of the analysis. How has the second occurrence changed from the first? More color, happier tone, more anger, whatever. That's where you have to start comparing and contrasting the two and making that interpretive jump and getting to analysis. Okay, I've noticed that at the beginning of How to Train Your Dragon, it's very dark and nighttime and dismal, and our main character seems scared, and he says these words. But by the end of the film, we have the same character speaking, he's saying the same exact words, but there's this one tiny little change in his dialogue. What does that mean? What could the author be telling us? That's what we need to think about, that's what we need to analyze and interpret, and that's applying the tool of bookending to our analysis of theme. Now, you will hear other names for bookending. People are probably talking about the same thing, but they might be using other terms, but they're really talking about the same thing. Sometimes when we're talking about the hero's journey, we say that a character starts in their ordinary world, and at the end they return with the elixir. Well, where are they returning to? Probably that ordinary world. So there a text starts and ends in the same location. You might also hear us say things like, this text comes full circle. It completes the cycle. It completes the circle. It comes back to where it began. Well, if it started here and comes back to where it started, that means it began and ended in the same place. That's bookending. And very specifically, you might hear the word reprise or reprise if you're studying musicals or plays. And so oftentimes with musicals, you have a musical theme established. Maybe it's a character's theme or an important moment in the musical, and that song plays. And then 15, 20, 45 minutes later, that same song is brought up again. It is reprised or reprised. And we should apply the same mental gymnastics here. How is it sung the second time? Who is singing it? Is it slower, faster, happier, more sad? Again, we have to first notice that something is coming back full circle, as something is returning or repeating, but then applying the analysis steps to really get to how are they similar yet different, and how do those differences teach us something? What caused the differences? That's probably where our lesson is buried. And so that's it. Pretty short podcast here. Bookending is beginning and ending text in a similar fashion. You're looking for location, color, speaker, etc. How are they similar? But also, how are they different? What has caused the difference over the course of this text? That's going to help us understand within the text what caused those changes, but then also how does that relate to the lessons we are supposed to be learning as readers or viewers. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those into class. We'd love to get those answered for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.